A presidency in peril? Democrats accuse Donald Trump of betraying his oath of office. He suggests removing him from power could cause a second civil war. I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the U.S. Impeachment Inquiry. Donald Trump has made countless phone calls to foreign leaders, but his conversation with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is one that could see him forced out of office. A whistleblower has accused the president of trying to dig up dirt on his political rival and potential 2020 electoral opponent Joe Biden. Not long after, the Democrats launched an official impeachment inquiry, but Donald Trump, never one to back away from a fight, called the inquiry the single greatest witch hunt in American history and demanded to meet his accuser face to face. It's only the fourth time Congress has taken such drastic action, and no U.S. president has ever actually been removed from power. Could Donald Trump be the first? Abu Bakr Shamahi reports.
It's the word that's been on the lips of US President Donald Trump's most ardent opponents since he took office. And now, the leaders of the Democratic Party finally appear to be on board with impeachment.
It's a sad week for our country. Very prayerfully and patriotically, we had to come to a decision that had to move forward with an impeachment inquiry of the President of the United States. This is nothing that we take lightly.
The focus of the impeachment inquiry is a whistleblower's allegation that Trump tried to get Ukraine to help him win the 2020 presidential election. After news of the whistleblower emerged, the White House released a rough transcript of a July phone call between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. It showed that Trump had repeatedly urged Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden, currently the leading Democratic presidential candidate. But the whistleblower dossier went further. It accused Trump of abusing his power, and officials in his administration of trying to keep the phone call a secret by hiding the transcript on a high-security server. Trump has denied the accusations and attacked Democrats.
What's going on now is the single greatest scam in the history of American politics. The Democrats want to take away your guns. They want to take away your health care. They want to take away your vote. They want to take away your freedom. They want to take away your judges. They want to take away everything.
Democrats on the left of the party, like Rashida Tlaib and Al Green, have been pressing for impeachment since the early days of the Trump presidency. But moderate Democrats, including much of the leadership, have been unsure if that was the best strategy. They're worried it could be seen as a partisan push to unseat Trump and could lose them voters. Now Trump has gone too far even for them, but the reasons for their uncertainty over impeachment still remain. The fear is that any inquiry may embolden Trump and drive his narrative that he's fighting against an entrenched elite. And then there's the fact that Trump is still popular among Republicans, which means that Republicans in Congress will be unlikely to turn against him and allow an impeachment inquiry to succeed. Then there's a country stuck in the middle of this, Ukraine. Zelensky had wanted to strengthen ties with the US, especially as his military fights Russian-backed separatists in the east of the country. The whistleblower accused Trump of threatening to withhold military aid to Ukraine if it didn't investigate Biden's son, Hunter, for corruption. Hunter Biden had worked for a Ukrainian energy firm. But now Zelensky is trying to quickly step out of the impeachment limelight.
No, you heard that we had, I think, good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed it.
And yet, unfortunately for the Ukrainian president, it doesn't look like the inquiry is going away. And Ukraine might have to get used to being at the center of the latest US political scandal for a long time to come. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now in Philadelphia is Marjorie Margolies. She's a former Democratic Congresswoman from Pennsylvania and also happens to be Chelsea Clinton's mother-in-law. Jason Osborne is in Washington. He's a former senior advisor with Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. And also in the U.S. Capitol is Arthur Rizer. He's the Director for Criminal Justice and Civil Liberties and former prosecutor for the Department of Justice. Sorry about that, Arthur. I didn't get your full title there. I'll sort that out later on. Jason Osborne, is Nancy Pelosi making a mistake?
Absolutely, I think so. I mean, I think you have to look at what we've seen over the last 2.5, 3 years here, which is an effort by the Democrats to say that this president was not duly elected, that he must have cheated. Almost from day one, we've had articles of impeachment being filed over a crazy Russia collusion experiment. Now they're taking a conversation with another foreign leader where the other foreign leader actually brought up what the efforts that he was trying to make in his country and trying to clean up the corruption that had undertaken. And so I think at the end of the day, what we're going to find here is that the Democrats have overplayed their hand. This is the second Republican president that has been charged with, by the Democrats, charged with not winning an election fairly. And so they're using every tool in their toolbox to try and take him out.
Marjorie Margolies, presidential abuse of power or the Democrats just desperate?
Well, I've got to hand it to the Republicans. Their message is very clear. We're just bad sports. That's crazy. And you'll notice that Nancy Pelosi has handled this very thoughtfully and has waited until all of this emerged. In '74, when we were looking at the Nixon problem, Republicans were very much backing him at an astonishing rate, the same as is now with Trump. When the bombshell dropped with the tapes, within 48 hours, everything changed. I think we're seeing the beginning of this. A couple of weeks ago, the polls with Republicans were in the low 20s. Now, I'm sorry, we're in the low teens. Now, 23% of Republicans think that the impeachment inquiry should continue, and 55% of the American public thinks it should go on. I have great respect for the Republicans because their message is clear. The Democrats are bad sports. They don't know what we're doing. But I think, well, for instance, the Mueller report, hundreds of pages, was confusing. Now the public understands. This is one page. This is a president saying to Zelensky, I need a favor from you, though. And it's very clear. It's been released. I think this is the beginning of the end.
Is it the beginning of the end, Arthur Rizer?
I mean, I think it's really hard to tell, right? So, I mean, listen, the founders set up the impeachment process exactly the same way they set up the jury trial. And it's supposed to be done in stages. I think anybody talking about removal at this point is really premature and they're overly political. At the same time, I think that individuals that are saying there's nothing there are also kind of hiding their heads in the sand. I was a federal prosecutor. I listened to a lot of recorded tapes of investigations we were conducting. I read a lot of transcripts. This is very reminiscent of a mob boss, giving an offer they can't refuse to an individual they're talking to. But there is no smoking gun. And I do appreciate the Nixon comparison, but the Nixon case had a smoking gun, and Nixon was removed from office. Yes, the impeachment didn't go through the Senate for a verdict. There was no impeachment in the first place. In essence, it was like a plea bargain. He resigned. He decided to leave office to escape that humiliation. But I definitely think that the whole point of the impeachment process is to gather the information. It's supposed to be the indictment piece of the phase. And I think one key thing that people need to think about, as with an indictment and a grand jury, impeachment proceedings come with the trappings of power. They have subpoena power. They have the ability to start digging. And I think,
right.
Nancy Pelosi is not a dumb woman. I think that we're going to see what's going to come of this in the weeks to come.
Jason Osborne, isn't that the key here, that it hasn't happened?
Can
Jason,
I add something?
Marjorie, just a second. I just want to jump in and ask Jason that this doesn't happen in isolation, right? Because people will take the leftovers of the Mueller inquiry and put it back in the microwave and reheat it, and they'll look at the Trump presidency along a long timeline. They put this in context, and at the very least, you have the president telling another foreign leader, hey, we give you a lot of aid and we help you a lot and we want to continue to help you. By the way, I need you to do something for me. That doesn't sound dodgy to you at all?
No, I mean, look at the presidency here and what Donald Trump has done and what he said during the campaign and what he's done since he's been in office, which is he has made no qualms about saying to world leaders that they need to step up to the plate and do things the right way. They need to contribute more to NATO. They need to do more about corruption in their own system. And what Donald Trump did here was something he's done publicly on the world stage for the last 2.5 years. I do agree with Andrew that there now needs to be an inquiry here. But I don't appreciate, folks saying that, Republicans are just hiding their heads in the stand and not seeing that there's something here. I think the fact of the matter is the impeachment inquiry has started. And I think at the end of the day, Donald Trump will be vindicated and there's nothing wrong there. I don't understand why we're not bringing up the Clinton trials here, where actually the guy committed perjury. There was a report. There was a report for Nixon when he was brought in. There was an investigation of Andrew Johnson as well.
It's 2019
this is nothing
about the US president. Okay, so Marjorie, right? There are those who say this might be morally sound from your perspective, but tactically naive, because looking at how things are set up, yes, you might push it through the House, but it goes to the Senate. The Republicans have a majority. You're not going to get a 2/3 majority from the Republicans in the Senate. You're going to lose. And congratulations, you've re-elected Donald Trump in 2020. Do you buy that?
Let me back up a little bit. I think there has never been in the Senate an impeachment that has gone through with Andrew Johnson, with Clinton, with Nixon stepped down. So I agree. But I do think with regard to impeachment, I think that when the facts emerge, this is a completely inappropriate conversation. When the facts emerge, the House will, I'm not sure, but I mean, there's so much going on. And Nancy Pelosi, as we said before, is very careful, as is Adam Schiff. When the facts emerge, the votes will be there. They're very close now. I agree that the votes will not be there in the Senate as of today. But I think there's so many more pieces of information that will emerge. And I've got to say, with regard to the Clintons, walk it off. You got to get over it. And let us focus on what is at hand right now, and listen to what are the pieces, even from the White House, that are coming before us. And I just think it was as I said, a completely inappropriate conversation with another world leader.
So, Jason, I don't want to have Marjorie setting the House rules here, but I think it is wise for us not to go down the Clinton rabbit hole here. Keeping this on point, Jason, Trump tweeting about possible civil war if he is impeached. He's quoting Robert Jeffress, a pastor and Fox News contributor. If the Democrats go through with this, there'll be civil war in the country. He speaks about the whistleblower being almost a spy, and then he goes on to say, well, in the good old days, what we used to do with spies, it was a lot more efficient than now.
Treason.
Sounds like a man who has something to hide, Jason, doesn't it?
No, not at all. And I think to be accurate, you have to say that what he was requoting for the pastor was a Civil War fracture, which is, I think, what we're experiencing right now, which is we have a divide in this country where you have Democrats from day one that have said that this guy should not be president at all, and we're going on a hunt to try and find what he did wrong. I think you have the Republicans on the other side like, no, the guy was duly elected. He won the Electoral College. He is the president. We need to move on and actually tackle the things that are facing this country.
And isn't this one of the things that's facing the country? But Jason, isn't this one of the things that's facing the country? A conversation with the leader of Ukraine where he's saying, do me a favor, and I might hinge aid money based on that favor, and it includes investigating my potential rival in 2020.
Well, first off, he never brought up the aid as being a contingent on him doing the favor. Hey, excuse me, I'm talking, Congresswoman. He brought up the fact, like he has in every conversation that he's had and every press conference that he's had with a world leader, where he's talked about the contribution that the U.S. has given to that country or to the EU or to NATO. And what he's done is he's taken that and he said, you know, we've done a lot for your country. Now I'm asking you to do me a favor and tackle corruption, which is something that the Obama administration actually talked about Ukraine and having problems there, which is something that Trump and the previous administrations have talked about in virtually every country that they've given money to, whether it be Egypt, whether it be Iraq, Afghanistan, whether it be any country in Europe that we've given money to. If there are problems, then they need to address those. At the end of the day, I think what we're going to find here is that this conversation is not unlike any other conversation that President Trump has had, President Obama has had when they've talked about giving money.
Arthur Rizer, is this standard par for the course when it comes to the U.S. president speaking to another world leader, especially if that other country needs the U.S. financially?
Oh, of course not. That's preposterous. I mean, this president has, you know, as over and over and over again said things and done things and has breached what we consider, you know, the common discourse in the political atmosphere over and over again. I think that, you know, what you kind of alluded to, you know, talking about spies, talking about shooting spies, and you're right, it is. When he talked about civil war in this context, that I think it was a little out of place, but he has talked about civil war in the past. You know, I think if you look at everything in the totality of the facts and this president's behavior through his entire presidency, and even the words that we have used here today, inappropriate, dodgy, we see what is going on. We have an extremely undisciplined man sitting in the Oval Office, and because he's undisciplined, that actually kind of works in his favor in a weird way, because it's very hard to attach a corruption to him. It's very hard to attach issues like did he abuse his power, because it's very hard to see what the intent is, because he's kind of all over the place all the time. And I've actually prosecuted people like this, and it's really hard to show the element of intent when someone is all over the place. And going back to the impeachment question and the removal of office question, that is the lens that we're supposed to be using. You know, President Clinton was impeached, and people, you know, the House said what you did was wrong, but the American people, through the voice of the Senate, said, yeah, not enough to get removed. And so I think that all these things kind of show exactly who we have in office, an undisciplined individual who says what he wants, and it's worked for him.
Okay, so Marjorie Margolies, to my earlier question, I just want to add to it and take it a step further. So we've seen the political positions being further entrenched here. To the left, this is another example of endless smoke connected to a raging inferno of a president that's illegitimate. To Trump supporters, this is yet another chapter in an endless witch hunt against him, where the other side is just going after him with anything that can stick, and it's baseless, and in a way it gets more support for him. If we can determine that when it goes to the Senate, he won't be impeached, what do you get out of it? Because I said earlier on, there are those who said, well, it would just further galvanize his base and might guarantee his election in 2020. What do the Democrats get out of it when the Senate says no impeachment, rather other than just a kind of personal moral victory?
Well, that's yet to be seen, obviously. But I think we are, as a country, moving to the center. I think that many people, and I work often with the folks out there, the lies and the tweets and the constant barrage of nastiness, I think people are getting sick of it. I do a lot of campus stuff with students who say, yeah, it's nice that he's not politically correct and he's saying it as he'd like, but we would like him to stop the tweets. We'd like him to stop the nastiness, stop ragging on John McCain, who is still dead. You know, but and I think that that's what's happening. I see those the polarization that you referred to. is coming much more to the center. And that's what we see with this latest poll, when 55% of Americans say that the impeachment inquiry should continue. I think it's going to be much different in the next month or two.
And that's interesting because also an ABC Ipsos poll says 64% of Americans believe that the pressuring of Zelensky to investigate Joe Biden is a serious issue. I mean, there could be some questions about the phrasing of that as well. Jason Osborne, Stephen Miller, Trump advisor, saying that the whistleblower is a member of the deep state. You don't believe that, do you?
You know, that term is actually, it's pretty confusing and something I would not necessarily use. But I do think there is an element of the federal government, and I've seen it repeatedly, particularly overseas, where you have individuals that don't believe in the policies that the president is putting forward, and that's certainly their right to do so, except for when it affects their job and what they're doing. And so I think you have, in the case of this whistleblower, according to the information that I've seen and that I've read, was not part of the conversation. So he was making assumptions about what the intent of the president was and what it meant and how he was digging up dirt on a presidential candidate that may or not be running against him in the future. So I do think there is an element out there that is out to get this president, just like I think there was an element when Obama took over and there were Republican conservatives that were in the administration in career positions that didn't necessarily like what was going on with the president. But I do think now you're seeing a more heightened awareness of that element.
Okay. Marjorie, Jason, and Arthur, it's been a pleasure having you all on the program. This is where I thank you all and cordially invite you to come back on the Newsmakers. Let's switch up now. Joining me now in Washington is Mitch Lerner. He's an American history professor and former vice chair of the County Democratic Party in Ohio. Mitch, as a historian, you've listened to the discussion preceding you for the past 15 minutes or so. As we've discussed, we've seen this movie before where the other side tries to impeach the president. The other guests mentioned Clinton, they mentioned Nixon. What makes it different this time around with Trump in 2019?
I'm honestly not sure that it is different, at least not different from the Nixon impeachment that they talked about earlier from 1974. In both cases, we have a Republican president that has clearly engaged in unscrupulous behavior. In this case, and I listened to your guests talk about this, but as a historian, let me correct the historical record for a moment. This is quite clearly and 100% an impeachable offense. There's no argument about it. And your previous guests, perhaps not being historians, haven't, as I have, gone back and looked at the debates around the Constitutional Convention in 1787. They haven't read the Federalist Papers, where America's founding fathers communicated to the American people their intention behind certain provisions in the Constitution. When they talk about impeachment in these debates, in their writings, in their speeches, they're quite clear that one of their greatest concern is meddling by foreign powers. And they are particularly worried, Madison talks about this, so many others talk about this, that an unscrupulous president might put his own personal interests ahead of the interests of the country. And if you look at that rough transcript that they talked about, it's quite clear that that's what's happened here. So regardless of what happens in the Senate, and I'm not 100% convinced that there won't be some Republicans that break and turn in favor of impeachment once all the evidence comes out. That's what happened in 1974 with Nixon. But regardless, this is most assuredly an impeachable offense, and I would certainly encourage the House to go forward.
Okay, let's have a little listen to Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been defending Donald Trump. Have a listen.
To me like a political setup. It's all hearsay. You can't get a parking ticket conviction based on hearsay. The whistleblower didn't hear the phone call. So this is a sham as far as I'm concerned. I want to know who told the whistleblower about the phone call.
Okay, so he's got an important vote in the Senate. As you say, 100% impeachable offense,
yes,
but possibly politically impossible because of the senators like Lindsey Graham, who sit there and will be defending the president, no?
Yes. Yes. So Lindsey Graham's argument is so ridiculous that it's almost hard to take it seriously. First of all, impeachment is not a legal issue. It's a political issue, and the Founding Fathers set it up that way explicitly. So questions of hearsay and President Trump's tweet about not getting to cross-examine his accuser, that's all ridiculous. The Founding Fathers explicitly gave the power to hold the trial for an impeachment to the Senate rather than the Supreme Court, because they recognized that there was a political component here, and whether or not the standard that was to be applied was not a legal standard. It was whether or not the president had betrayed the public trust. In this case, he clearly has. Now, Lindsey Graham was once an ardent critic of the president. He said that if the Republicans nominate Trump for the presidency, they would pay a price for it, and they would deserve to do so. Those chickens have come home to roost. And as much as Graham and Mitch McConnell and some of the others are going to circle their wagons, the reality is that this is an impeachable offense. I point out to people like Graham that when impeachment started in the Nixon investigation in 1973, public support was at about 20%, and there were no Republicans whatsoever in favor of it. After a year or so of hearings and all the things that the Nixon administration had done came out, that number shot up. We had more than 50% support for removal. We had a number of Republicans, not a lot, but some who broke ranks.
Right.
So this is absolutely something that needs to be investigated, and I hope that the Republicans can put the interests of their country ahead of the interests of their party.
Okay, I'm out of time, but next time I'm going to call you to ask you, Mitch, what happens to a president if the other side tries to impeach him but fails, whether the support goes up or down historically. But we're out of time for this episode. Thanks so much, Mitch. And thank you so much for joining us here on this episode of The Newsmakers. Bye-bye. What's